Welcome back to the Williams Real Estate Channel. Today we are running through the April 2025 property market update. We'll start by running through the Australian CoreLogic dwelling price month on month. This is the overarching price indicator for the whole of the Australian market. It rose by 0.3% in April 2023. But as you know, there's not one property market. We have to dig a little deeper underneath the hood, and this is what has come out for the month of April. We saw a strong month from Darwin, up 1.1%, followed by Hobart, up 0.9%, followed by Brisbane, 0.4%, along with Perth and Adelaide at 0.3%, and with Sydney, Melbourne, with the least amount of growth for the month at 0.2%. So we can see now that the steam looks to be coming out of Perth, Adelaide, and Brisbane. They were historically the strong leading months or markets month on month. Now looks to have been taken over from Darwin, Hobart. This could just be a flash in the pan, sugar hit, coming back from a good few months and years in correction in Hobart, so it can be just a out of month adjustment. Don't suspect Hobart to continue to keep running, as you'll see in the future slides. And if we look at an annualized basis, you'll see that Perth has done the best over the last 12 months with 10% growth, followed by Adelaide at 9.8% growth, then Brisbane at 7.8% growth, followed by Darwin at 2.5%, then Sydney 0.9%, Hobart at 0.5%, and with Melbourne and Canberra in slightly negative for the year to date. And what is most interesting, I find, is Sydney's leading, obviously, at the highest median price point. This is a home value index for as of April 2025. We then have in second place Brisbane at 907,000, followed by Adelaide at 825,000. Sorry, Canberra at 864,000, then Adelaide at 825. Then we have Perth at 807. Then we have Melbourne in sixth place. So historically, Melbourne is typically second behind Sydney in terms of a median price point. But this is really a once in a lifetime opportunity, I think, or at least once in or twice opportunity in a lifetime, that you'll see the likes of Melbourne currently showing extreme value. At some point, Melbourne will catch up, and it's only a matter of time until Sydney and Melbourne crank into their next growth cycle and continue to power on to that next level, as it is no way sustainable for Melbourne to be in sixth median price point behind Canberra, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane. At some point, the demand will shift from those smaller tiered markets, and the ripple effect will come back to Sydney and Melbourne in the years ahead. As we use the framework of the 18-year land cycle to understand where we sit in the market, being on the blue marker, 11, 12 months away from peak market, where we'll see the market top out come middle of next year, and then come the end of 26 and come 2027, 28, that's when the land-driven downturn will commence. The markets that will go through the biggest correction will be the likes of Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, and their respective regions, along with Darwin, as they have been the markets that have performing most strongly in the recent years. And then the demand will then shift back from these markets back to Sydney and Melbourne once the mainstream can clearly see that it's evident that those markets are no longer have any growth and they're in a downturn. The demand will shift then back to Sydney, Melbourne around 2027, and Sydney, Melbourne will then lead again as being the outperformers in the years ahead, just like they did so between 2007, 2008, all the way up to 2017. Good solid 10 years of growth out of Sydney, Melbourne during that period, which is where we're heading in the future years ahead. So we'll run through where we sit currently. So if you can visualize based off that price slide that we sit currently now, equivalent point of time 2006 in the prior cycle, you'll be able to see based off these 20 years of sales data for each of these markets where they are potentially heading in the future based off history and the 18-year land cycle framework. We can see that units in Adelaide have had a solid run the last couple of years, but looks to have showing signs of a top as it has come back and it's started to look to hit a limit. And typically from trough to peak, you never really see more than a 150, 160% growth. So it's come off a base of around that 170, 175,000. Now it's over 400. That's more than 100% growth. That's a good indicator that potentially it's hitting its limit. And just like what happened in 2006-7, back in history, it reached a top and then went through a protracted, stagnant, flat period for a good 10 plus years before experiencing the next growth run. So that's what we can expect from Adelaide units in the years ahead. I think it's reached the top and will more or less start to stagnate over the next good 10 years. Similar story with Adelaide houses. Looks to have started to reach a top in recent months. And if we look back at history, 2006-7, it topped out and flattened out for a good few years. Houses can be a little bit more stable, so you still will get the modest growth, 1%, 2%, 3%, but you won't experience that solid growth run of 10, 15, 20% within a year or two until 10 or 15 years down the track, until the next growth cycle. Similar story with Perth units, has had a solid run recent years and is looking like it's showing signs of losing a bit of momentum, losing a bit of steam. Came off a base of around 250 and is now hitting 500. So that's 100% growth from trough to peak. We'll probably have another couple of years worth of growth, but not like the last 2 or 3. Will start to level out a bit. And if we look back at history, the same thing happened. Good solid run in 2005-6 in Perth and then hit a top and then went through this protracted up and down period for many years. So Perth units, again, looks to have started to reach its limits, along with houses in Perth. Has had a solid run the last few years and looks to, in recent months, showing signs of a top. This could well be it. Just like what happened in 2006-7, reached the top and then went through this protracted flat to negative period. For houses, Brisbane units, again, similar story, has had a solid growth run in recent years, but is starting to show signs of losing a bit of momentum, losing a bit of steam. I still suspect that Brisbane will continue to have good solid growth over the next 1 to 3 years, as it'll get a final sugar hit from all the euphoria, fear of missing out, ploughing in because of the Olympic Games. So it will get a final sugar hit, but once it does reach its limits in the next couple of years, year or two, it'll then start a very similar protracted flat to negative period, just like what happened between 2008-9 through to 2021. Similar story with houses. has had a solid run last recent years, but is showing signs of losing a bit of steam. Will continue to carry on for the next 1 to 3 years, but at some point will level out. Won't go through a significant negative downturn like what we can see in the likes of Perth, but will flatten out and be more subdued growth in the years ahead. Darwin units. So Darwin has started its growth run, but then has since come off. And if we look back at history, from 2005-6 had a solid, strong growth run up until the top in 2014. A lot of this is driven by the mining sector. If the mines are pumping, Darwin will do well. This was also thanks to China. China was driving a lot of their construction property industry in overdrive back during this similar period of time. This time around, China's economy is not as strong. They don't have as strong of a property sector and construction sector currently than if we compare it to the same period in the prior cycle. Further to that, to rub insult into injury, they've got the US hitting them with 140% tariff. So China's economy is not as strong, and it's even arguably shutting down in certain areas of their industries, including manufacturing. So for that reason, the demand for raw materials that goes into manufacturing cars and electronics will be less. So coal iron ore demand will be less currently now and potentially in the future coming years. For that reason, the mines might not pick up as strongly as they did in the prior cycle. Therefore, the likes of Darwin might not see this significant growth run, and it could actually just hit a top now and plateau out and even go negative. It could go either way. So until we see the mines start to really crank, that'll have a flow-on effect to land price in Darwin as land takes all economic gains. It's economic rent. If there's people flying in, flying out to the mines on 2, 3, 400,000 a year to drive trucks around, they have the disposable income to pump into Darwin, into the property markets. If we're not seeing that as much as what we did historically, then we can expect Darwin to be a little bit more subdued over the next few years. Same goes for houses. Have come to its previous all-time high. Whether or not it'll continue to keep running, it's anyone's guess, really. When a market has such a dependency on the mining sector, it can be like playing a game of roulette. So for that reason, we're not specialised in buying in Darwin. We find a lot more stable, diversified markets across the East Coast in the likes of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and their respective regions. That brings us to Melbourne. We've been super pumped on Melbourne. I find it probably the best value currently in the country based off a yield perspective, a price that you pay relative to the intrinsic value. You are buying deals for half the intrinsic value in Melbourne right now. So we see this growth in the recent years has been in this specific suburb in Melbourne has been quite strong, even though a lot of Melbourne has gone through tough times during COVID and the recent restrictions put on by the government, restricting the property construction industry by way of higher taxes on property. Not every suburb will feel the pain. As an example, Docklands, right in the city centre, is feeling a lot of the brunt of recent years. If you look at the historical sales data, it's up and down like a yo-yo. A lot of the inner city office space is also getting hammered. But if you understand how, firstly, the markets run, but then also how different types of products in different locations, where the suburbs are located, not too close, not too far away to the city centre, where they can gentrify, where you're getting it for good prices, good yields, and then that's when you can really pick the diamonds in the rough suburbs. Not every suburb I would invest in Melbourne. There's probably only half a dozen to a dozen. So this is one of them where, as you can see, recent years hasn't been had too bad of growth. And if we look back at history between 2005 and 6, it started. It's already started. I can feel it already starting. We're getting better deals last year than we were this year, and it's already starting. Come 2 or 3 years away, it'll be the mainstream. Everyone will be rushing in with the fear of missing out. It'll be the next market. Not until that won't happen until the steam comes out of Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, and once it becomes well evident to the masses that it's no longer a good idea to buy in those markets, they'll then shift back to the likes of Melbourne and Sydney, and they'll be away at the races again. Same goes for houses. A little bit more time on houses. They are due to stagnate over the next year or two, but then they will commence the growth cycle in houses. Sydney units slightly behind Melbourne. As you can see, Sydney units have stagnated ever since the top in 2017, 2016, 2017, has been up and down, will continue to do so until around 2028, 2029, at which point it'll then take off and be away at the races again, just like what happened between 2009 to 2017 in certain suburbs. Same goes for houses in Sydney. A little bit more tricky. This is obviously a suburb with a median price point sub 800. When buying houses, you want to try and make sure that you can still get a solid yield. You don't want to go and buy a $2 million house with a 1% or 2% yield, because it'll lock you out and you will no longer be able to continually acquire finance out of the banks. It is a game of finance. So we don't typically buy houses in the metros. We'd rather go to a duplex or a block of units for that same price point. We typically buy houses in the regions, as you can still get solid yields. But we do occasionally, I mean, we're buying houses up around Brisbane to that 250, 300 grand mark with solid yields. So we can still get houses in Sydney, the likes of Sydney and even Melbourne, with a 5-6% yield. But there's time, definitely, on Sydney houses. Based off history, will continue to be subdued and stagnate for a good few years, probably another 3 to 5 years before we'll then have a growth run. And what I find is when the growth run starts, typically it's led from the bottom end, more affordable stock. So you'll see the units, villas, townhouses start first. Once affordability becomes a bit of an issue, then that spills over into houses, and houses then run second to that. Now we have Canberra units, has had a solid run in recent years, but looks to have hit a top around 2022 and has started to go through its downturn. Will probably be short-lived based off history. Between 2005-6, continued to have a growth run and then stabilized out a bit and went through a bit of a subdued until around 2015. So it could be potentially hitting a top and just looks to have hit a little bit of a benchmark. It may go on a little bit further, but I mean, for Canberra, 600,000, 650,000 for units, it's getting up there. There's definitely better value we can find right now around the country. It's pretty much on intrinsic value. It costs about 600 to 650 to build. So you want to buy for half of that. You don't want to buy on, and you definitely don't want to buy above. So Canberra is definitely not one of our picks currently. Canberra houses, again, has had a solid run in recent years, but looks to have reached the top and has started to stagnate. and will probably do so. But Canberra is not dependent on the mining sector really at all. It's got agriculture, it's got government jobs. It's pretty diversified. The only thing is, in certain markets, they do have the 99-year lease to the government, so that can also subdue growth. But houses will probably stagnate over the next good few years as they have had their time in the sun. Coming to Hobart now, units had a solid run recent years after 2017, 2018, as it typically gets the decentralisation out of Melbourne. Once Melbourne becomes too expensive in the first half of the cycle, people then look for the next best. Hobart then receives the demand out of the likes of Melbourne and regional Victoria. That's when it saw its growth run, topped out in 22, as then people then decentralise into the likes of Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, and then those markets take off in the later stages of the cycle. Hence why it reached its top in 2022, has retraced and has started to stagnate and will continue to stagnate by the looks of things, like what happened in 2006-7, all the way through to 2015. So that could look like over the next 10 years, between now and to 2035, could stagnate until experience another growth run like what happened in recent years. Same goes for houses, have looked to have reached the top in 22 and has retraced and will probably stagnate and go flat for the next good 10 years, just like what happened between 2005 and 6 to 2015, within this same band of around that 600,000 median price point. And this is a summary snapshot of where I see all the markets currently sitting based off 2025 and the 18-year land cycle framework. We have Adelaide hitting a top, showing signs of a top, and will probably go through a slowdown in the coming year, followed by Perth showing signs of losing steam, as well as Brisbane is showing signs of losing steam, but is still getting the demand, still getting the fear of missing out. The masses think it's going to go on forever, like what they typically do. The masses tend to charge into overheated markets towards the tail end of the boom, as they think it's going to go on forever and ever and ever. They tend to look in the rearview mirror, and if there's been growth year on year in the recent years, the masses think that's a good idea to continue to buy into those markets. It's never a good sign. You want to look in the rearview mirror and see a market that's been dead as a doorknob for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Come 10 years, it's any time it will hook through a growth cycle. So buyers beware. We are no longer buying in Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, Darwin. Again, Darwin, that could go either way. See how China plays out over the next coming years. And then we have Hobart, Canberra, reached the top around 2022 and are now going through their cooling period in the market. They will stabilise and hit a trough and then flatline for a number of years before then starting the next growth cycle. We have Melbourne. I believe Melbourne's at the bottom and only has up from here. Second to that, Sydney. Sydney has probably another, depending on what suburb you look at, 1 to 3 years to soften out, bottom out, before it will then commence its next growth cycle. So some suburbs have already started and have bottomed out. We were buying in last year and for 313,000, 340,000, sub 350 for 1 and 2 beds. Now you can't get really anything less than 400, 420, 450 for 2 beds. So the deals are out there. You can still get the deals. You need to get them off market though through the agents. If you're looking at realestate.com and Domain, you will be paying market or over market. If you get them offline through an agent, you can definitely get the deal for well under market value. So if you want help, reach out. If you had any value of that, please like, subscribe, share. Send me an email if you want some feedback on your own situation, or if you want to provide me any feedback on what to do with the channel. If you want help buying an investment grade property, shoot me an email, send me your story, and we can jump on a call and see how we may work together in the coming months. Until next time, thank you for watching.